this is gonna be a weird one.
So what do you get when you combine a glam metal frontman, 90s era internet, and Robert Englund in his undies?
Yeah, it's gonna be one of those episodes today, so let's dive into D. Snider's 1998 horror movie, Strangeland.
Similar to my Silent Hill movie review, although mostly that was out of paranoia from the copyright strike I got from the Cable Guy review that you'll never see, the way I'm structuring this is with the technical aspects first, and then moving on to the plot synopsis. Anyway, Strangeland, both due to its plot and by the standards of its time, is very firmly rooted in the 90s, given that a large portion of the movie is dedicated to late 90s era internet chat rooms, alongside a lot of metal music that was going on at that time. In fact, it's pretty much to the point where you can practically count the amount of times you hear Cold Chamber in the background of certain scenes.
That's not to say that it's necessarily bad, but it does make the movie very much a product of its time in every sense of the word.
Industrial metal raves, IRC chat rooms, nu metal tracks, it all feels very 90s, which in my opinion works to the movie's advantage. To me, it gives Strangeland a sense of charm that I think had I watched it at its time of release, I probably would have just passed the movie off as more run-of-the-mill than it actually is. But 20 years gone by aside, Strangeland, by the standards of the time, looks quite nice, and especially considering that the movie centers around the whole horror theme of body modification and sadomasochism, a la Saw before Saw came out, it at least makes for a more interesting horror flick, or at the very least compared to the slasher revival craze that was going on at the time.
Thank you, Wes Craven, because the world sure did need Scream to exist.
As for the soundtrack, as I brought up before, the movie utilizes a mixture of metal music and a theatrical score, which, unlike most movies where it's mostly the score with occasional licensed tracks playing, in this movie, it's an equal mix.
Now, the instrumental score, though unmemorable, it does serve its purpose in the scenes in which it is played.
But being the metal fan that I am, I enjoy the licensed tracks by the bands such as Cold Chamber, Sevendust, Pantera, Soulfly. All of these bands I get a kick out of, considering that D. Snider is a metal frontman. This kind of thing was kinda to be expected. So D. Snider's Strangeland is a passion project of his which not only spans this movie, but also a comic book prequel series which details the life of Carlton Hendricks, a schizophrenic man who, when unmedicated, becomes a sociopathic pain fetishist Captain Howdy. And before anybody brings it up, no, not that Captain Howdy.
Although, it does make me hope for a Linda Blair vs. Carlton Hendricks crossover movie in 2003. Although, being serious for a second, it does kind of strike me as a little bit odd that two horror icons have the exact same name.
Anyway, what Captain Howdy does in Strangeland is that he's a highly intelligent sociopath who seeks to liberate the people from their boundaries that they place themselves in, and often utilizes the technology granted to him by the digital age of the internet in order to perform his deeds. He does this through body modification, by perversely altering people's bodies by stripping them naked, and piercing them with stitches, hooks, and other such fetishistic things, which will either have people turn away in disgust, or erotically turned on.
So with that in mind, let's take a dive into the deep unknown and explore the mind of Carlton Hendricks with D. Snider's Strangeland.
So the plot kicks off with two teenagers spending their night with nothing else to do but go off and surf the internet.
I'd just like to remind you that this movie came out in 1998.
Well anyway, the two of them are talking shit on IRC chat rooms and doing stuff which, honestly, I'm really not too sure about since I wasn't really around during the late 90s period of the internet, so I can only guess that this is what people did in an era where YouTube wasn't a thing. While chatting up some strangers online, the two come across one, Captain Howdy, who, after a brief conversation, invites them to a party which the two of them just accept like the pair of dolts that they are.
Ordinarily, I would question why these two would consider going to this dude's party considering that they just met him online, but then I remember, this is 1998 we're talking about here, so it's clear to me that these two should have paid more attention to ads like this.
The internet has become the hunting ground of the pedophile. You've seen what's on his screen. Imagine what's on his mind.
It's then that we're introduced to police detective Mike Gage, the father of us cybersurfing minx Genevieve, who, after a phone call from her friend's parents, enlightens Mike that Genevieve didn't come home last night. It comes to no surprise to the viewer that Captain Howdy was ultimately the one responsible for kidnapping Genevieve, and he keeps her within his house, as demonstrated by some pretty decent cinematography. But it's ultimately just there to hammer the point home of, "Welcome to my creepy basement." With his daughter missing, Mike is on the case, but progress is slow, which then leads to a basic explanation of what the internet can do, well, I suppose back in 1998.
No, it's more than that. I don't have to be me. Sometimes I pretend I'm some goody two-shoe prom queen, and then I can change my online name and become a hell-raising B-girl.
Ah, the days before YTMND and early YouTube had taken people's attention. I don't know, I guess role-playing must have been a big thing back in the day. I I wouldn't really know.
Anyway, it's here that we're introduced to Captain Howdy in the flesh. Unlike a Freddy Krueger who just kills for fun, or a Jason Voorhees who kills because his mum tells him to, or even a Michael Myers who just kills for quite literally no reason, Captain Howdy is portrayed as more of a sociopathic liberator of the masses, so to speak.
We live in a world filled with people wearing middle-aged bodies, yet they stumble to a crawl with their childlike minds.
Holy shit. I think D. Snider just predicted modern-day internet culture.
Howdy goes on to explain how he believes that everybody should undergo a rite of passage, as he calls it, and believes that physical and emotional pain is key to embracing his idea of adulthood.
And as an antagonist, while I can see some people looking at Captain Howdy with a dull look in the eyes with the whole philosophy porn, I do think that this makes him stand out from the crowd in terms of horror movie villains such as the Slasher of the Week.
Later on, Mike discovers the corpse of Genevieve's friend, and alongside that also finds evidence in the form of a septum spike, which, as Deathcore McGee over here informs us, is about whoever's kidnapped Genevieve knows his shit about piercing, which leads us into the world of body modification. With the evidence leading them to a club within the city, Mike and his partner head inside to see what basically amounts to 90s goth personified. Actually, it's kinda to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if we got a cameo of Neo and Trinity talking about what the Matrix is by this point. Realizing that they're looking for a needle in a haystack, the two leave the club while, unbeknownst to them, but knownst to us, beneath all the sadomasochism and the dirty dealings of business as usual, lie Captain Howdy in one of his pain rituals, being hung up by his nipples.
Ah, my nipples, they hurt! They hurt when I twist them!
This only to be followed up by how we wish to cross from life into death and angry that he was unable to make such a transition. Meanwhile, with Mike, instead of pussyfooting around with police work, he gets right onto it and ends up checking Genevieve's computer for any links between her kidnapper and the elusive Captain Howdy she was chatting with. Mike strikes up an online conversation with Captain Howdy by altering Genevieve's details on her account, and eventually Captain Howdy invites him to a party. Meanwhile, in Captain Howdy's creepy basement, he goes on about the hypocrisy of how plastic surgery and hair transplants are deemed acceptable, while piercing, tattoos, and other such body modifications are viewed as taboo.
The ampeline. Well chosen. Now that's a piercing. Sure, it is a touchy operation. You've got to go through the spongiosum, and it does bleed a lot. And God forbid you hit the cavernosum. Blood squirts everywhere.
So does this mean that Captain Howdy is a member of Organization 13? I don't know, the philosophy and logo design kind of fit.
Anyway, it's while Howdy is busy psychologically tormenting his victim with the prospect of having his cock bleed out, combined with a crying Genevieve while police storm the address Howdy had given Mike, all the while being cross-cut with Captain Howdy really piercing the perception of how his victim views his way of life.
Now for those of you who are squeamish, or just disgusted, or just fainted and are not watching this review anymore, this is the kind of horror you should expect to see in this movie.
And how scary I think you'll find this movie really depends upon whether or not you're squeamish to rather, let's just say, sensitive body areas. But it's also the conditions in which Captain Howdy leaves his victims in, as they're typically stripped, bound and gagged naked with their mouths sewn shut and their basic humanity stripped away from them. If this is the kind of thing that makes you uncomfortable, then Strangeland is probably going to make you want to avoid using the internet for quite some time.
In fact, who knows? Maybe even I could be Captain Howdy.
Meanwhile, as it turns out, Mike and the police end up finding out that Captain Howdy had them duped.
My pills.
Oh, what a moron! Am I right?
Even despite his melancholy mood, Mike persists with finding Genevieve and gets into contact with Captain Howdy again, to which the two of them get back into it with messages going back and forth, to which Mike eventually reaches the conclusion that Captain Howdy is issuing him a challenge to find him. And based upon finding audio clues to his location, Mike finds Howdy and enters into his creepy basement. Exploring deep inside, Mike finds the twisted results of Howdy's other victims, but in this he also finds Genevieve. Although that's not before going up against Captain Howdy in battle, which we finally get a good look into what our horror movie antagonist looks like.
And he looks like He-Man if he was reimagined into a brutal legend character.
Mike manages to defeat and arrest Howdy, but can do little to ease Genevieve's agony, as Howdy teases her given that there's, well, really not much else he can do but play with her already damaged psyche. And so, in the aftermath of Captain Howdy's arrest, the following news reports explain that Captain Howdy, or rather Carlton Hendricks, had pled insanity and subsequently underwent psychological evaluation and treatment to get him back on the straight and narrow.
And surprisingly, it actually works.
4 years later, and taking steady medication, Carlton Hendricks is a reformed man and is scheduled for release back into the real world, now completely sane.
Well, that makes for a decent spin on a horror movie antagonist. I mean, I can't say I would have ever seen this kind of thing coming. Well, on that note, I am Scully, keep it new metal, and this is totally where the movie ends. See ya. No. Yeah, man, I told you not to worry about it. Okay, listen, man, something came up and you're just gonna have to sort out this whole pogo stick incident yourself. Look, yeah, I know. Look, I'm in the middle of something. Take care of it yourself, mate, alright? Alright? Okay, see ya. Moving on.
No, that's not the end of the movie, although, from the way it's framed, it would have easily made for a satisfying conclusion, albeit a quick one. Instead, we see the mild-mannered Carlton Hendricks, who, both by his temperament and appearance, looks as if he couldn't hurt a fly. But just so long as Carlton keeps up with his medication, then Captain Howdy should be a thing of the past. Meanwhile, with Genevieve, 4 years gone by, and let's just say that she's really torn up about her past experience with Captain Howdy.
You observe the body, experiencing the sensation. Surrender to the experience. Feel the endorphin rush as the surgical steel slices through.
And to make matters worse for Hendricks, given his past transgressions, the townspeople are none too happy about Carlton Hendricks' release. Although, to this movie's credit, I think it actually succeeds in being a horror movie where you actually care about the antagonist.
I'm sorry.
My Lord Jesus Christ will see you burn in hell, you sorry son of a bitch!
And it's scenes like this that I honestly find the most compelling in this movie, as it creates a divide between the meek Carlton Hendricks compared to the sick fuck that is Captain Howdy. But credit where credit is due, because Snider also makes for a pretty good performance as both Howdy and Hendricks, which, especially in this scene, really shows how both characters are on the opposite sides of the spectrum.
In fact, one of my bigger criticisms of this movie is that there honestly isn't enough Carlton Hendricks in the movie, but that's something I'll save for a little bit later. Also, something that I'm pretty sure the Strangeland prequel comic delves into, but that's a review for another time.
Anyway, the ringleader of this little angry mob is led by none other than Burn Victim McButterknives himself, Robert Englund. Robert Englund plays a complete cockhead named Jackson Roth, who, with this movie weirdly enough, portrays as the orchestrator of the mob's street justice against Carlton Hendricks.
And I say weirdly because in the trailers for this movie, he comes off as if he's going to become one of the major protagonists and, you know, the kind of person who's going to become a major player in the movie, but honestly, in the grand scheme of things, what results on screen is kind of baffling, to be perfectly honest.
Whereas in the movie itself, he's a drunken dick who ends up deciding to take vengeance on Carlton Hendricks, which, as I'll get to a little bit later, he's honestly more of a side character in the grand scheme of things.
Not to say that Jackson's character is entirely misused, but I feel that it's one that probably could have been handled a little bit better.
Anyway, because Carlton Hendricks can't have nice things, the mob led by Jackson raid his house and proceed to kick the shit out of him, which irrevocably results in Carlton Hendricks losing his medication and the ensuing chaos.
I think we all know where this is headed.
Surprisingly enough, Mike keeps watch of the Hendricks house and spots the mob enacting their street justice upon Carlton, with both of them spotting each other, but Mike ultimately deciding not to help Carlton out. With Carlton just hanging out with the mob, they watch on as he strangles to death, but not before going home to presumably star in some kind of Nightmare on Elm Street movie. However, it seems that Carlton Hendricks manages to catch a lucky break.
What a rush!
Sometime later we see, oh my god!
Ew, dude. I never want to see Robert Englund in his undies ever again.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, W your pleasure viewers, because apparently Jackson and his wife are indulging into some foreplay.
Turning me on here.
My eyes, the goggles do nothing.
Yeah, to cut to the chase here, the sexy dancer is revealed to be Captain Howdy. You know, it occurs to me that at some point in this movie's development, somebody thought that it would be a good idea to have Dee Snider performing an erotic dance to turn on Robert Englund in his undies while unfitting disco music plays in the background.
Jesus, that's something I never thought I'd say.
Anyway, Howdy contacts the police and goes into a philosophy battle with Mike, rubbing his nose in the fact that he left him to the wolves, while Mike dismisses the value that Howdy places within his badge, so to speak.
Your badges have no meaning. My badge represents the law.
And which law is that, Michael? The law that found me not guilty? Or the law that allowed others to take matters into their own hands?
It's from this that Captain Howdy establishes that he's now out to liberate the people who were responsible for the torment of Carlton Hendricks, which is eventually revealed to be how he kidnapped those who were his strongest opponents in the mob.
And it's in scenes like these that I feel that Strangeland truly shines as a horror movie.
It's been said that the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. For we never know how much is enough.
What this showcases is not only Captain Howdy's methods of physical and psychological torment, but also the way in which he exposes the vain, almost childlike reprisal for that which does not fit the societal mold.
All the while being intercut with Howdy digging in hooks and knives into people's skin just to make the whole scene uncomfortable to watch.
You do not feel the pain. The body feels the pain.
And while the scenes themselves aren't all-out gore fests, honestly, they don't need to be, because the muffled screams of pain do more than enough to deliver the abject pain and horror that they must be experiencing at the hands of Captain Howdy. With the mob taken care of, Captain Howdy then sets his sights on Mike Gage, and like last time, his means of getting to him is through Genevieve. When confronting them over a webcam, Captain Howdy is clearly arousing the two parents, and he reveals that he does in fact have Genevieve, and plans to take his previous ritual with her one step beyond. And all of this stems from Mike's apathy towards Carlton Hendricks' abuse by the hands of the mob. The police track down Captain Howdy's creepy basement, and then see the results of his handiwork alongside finding Genevieve, where Mike discovers a match packet with a message telling him to head for the nightclub which he was at earlier, and the two finally confront each other in the final battle. But one interesting thing to note is also the interactions between Mike and Captain Howdy, in which, after all he's been through, Mike appears to be on par with Howdy in terms of the duality between Howdy's philosophy versus the philosophy of the common man.
And also that Dee Snider sings by far the greatest cover of Ring Around the Rosies I have ever heard in my life.
Ring around Rosie, pocket full of posy.
After a lengthy fight, Mike manages to beat Captain Howdy, and let's just say after all he's been through, he's feeling a little burned out. And so the movie ends with Mike escaping the burning nightclub, with the last image of Captain Howdy quite literally being burned into the viewers' minds.
So with all that said, what are my final thoughts on Dee Snider's Strangeland?
While Strangeland might not be the most outright terrifying movie you've ever seen, there's a lot more to this movie than a lazily hacked-together slasher flick like so many movies that were coming out at the time. Captain Howdy makes for both an entertaining, yet also a very interesting psychological antagonist, and from that aspect, I really feel as if his character could be taken one step beyond. And in the sense that Captain Howdy's methodology could have extended to far more than just mere teenagers that he meets on the internet, because one of the interesting things that I saw with the mob ringleaders getting their comeuppance is that I truly saw the full extent of what Captain Howdy was capable of. I don't know, I guess to go into a little bit more detail, what I would have liked to have seen is a scenario where Captain Howdy selectively chooses his victims based upon the kind of pain ritual that would liberate them, as he puts it. But as for the rest of the movie, I enjoy the performances, I love the soundtrack, and the scenes of body horror work quite well in the instances where it needs to unsettle the viewer. In terms of recommendations, if you're squeamish when it comes to things like blades being slowly inserted into the skin, looking for a horror movie that's firmly rooted in the 90s, or you just want to see Robert Englund in his undies, you sick fuck, then Dee Snider's Strangeland is a party that I'm pretty sure you'll want to be invited to.
So on that note, I am Skully, keep it new metal, and the next time somebody invites you to a party online, be sure to stay away from Captain Howdy.